Okay, let's start. Thank you, Chris, for handling audiovisual. Thank you, everyone, for attending my session. Early morning, so let's start. Please silence your phone and explore everything PAS has to offer. I think you can also get the recording of sessions afterwards. I haven't been in a keynote, so I don't know how it works, hopefully. A little bit about me. I'm Reza. I'm a Power BI consultant, MVP regional director. I'm working at Dataset. I'm doing Power BI training and consulting, usually all around the world. How many of you heard of Dataset? Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you for coming. In Dataset, we do training and consulting on Power BI, and I usually write a lot of blog articles over there, so hopefully you can find something useful there. I've also written some Power BI books. Some of them are free available. You can go and download from the website. The architecture book is not free, but hopefully you can find it in the bookstore here somewhere. My contact information is here. If you have any questions later on, feel free to reach out to me, ask any questions you like. OK, so what we are going to talk about today is Power BI architecture. How many of you worked with Power BI already? OK, that's pretty much like 90, 80% of the room. How many of you are familiar with different components of Power BI, like Power Query? How many of you are familiar with Power Query? OK, that's about the same. DAX, right? OK. And visualization, of course, if you work with Power BI, you know that it has a visualization. OK, so let's talk about the architecture of Power BI. And talking about architecture is quite vast topic, talking about different aspects of architecture. The book that I've written is like 550 pages on architecture, right? We are not going to talk about all of those 550 pages here. I selected only two aspects of that, which is development architecture, which is the main focus of this session, and sharing architecture. For that, we should see how much time we get. If we get time, we'll talk about that. Otherwise, everything that I'm explaining to you, I've written blogs, articles about that. And at the last slide, I have links to all of those. So if I miss something, or if you want to explore something later on more, just go find the last slide, click on the link. You'll get the full article about that. OK, so development architecture of Power BI is talking about different personas of people when they work with Power BI, when they want to implement Power BI solutions. What is the best way for them to implement the Power BI solution, right? Because Power BI makes things much simple, right? Really simpler, easier than traditional BI. Everyone can install Power BI desktop, get data from somewhere, visualize it, and use it, right? And that might cause some issues. So let's talk about those personas. Let's talk about the first persona. The persona of one single developer in a company, in an organization, in a team, only one person, building the Power BI solution to solve a reporting challenge, right? Sales reporting, invoicing reporting, something like that, for multiple users. But it is only one single developer in that team, one single developer in that organization. For this kind of persona, we need something to be agile, to be really fast, to be all in one environment, for that person to work really simple in that scenario, right? And Power BI makes it really easy, right? With Power BI, I can have actually everything in one file. I can have one Power BI desktop open, get data from wherever I want, do data transformation with Power Query, then calculations, relationships, everything, visualizations, all within one environment. After building that report, I publish it to the website. I share it with my users, right? I'll talk about the sharing strategies later, right? But it's all in one Power BI file. And if you worked with Power BI file, you know that Power BI files are stored as PBIX files. So everything is in one file. I don't really need to split it into multiple files, because it makes my job much easier as long as it is all in one file, right? So everything easy, simple, no problem, right? Now, the problem happens when we have multiple developers, when we have a team of people developing, let's say, one solution or multiple solutions. It's not one single developer, right? Multiple developers, right? And if you are not careful, something like this might happen, right? So if you have multiple developers, talking about Power BI, stored as one PBIX file, right? Multiple people, multiple developers cannot work at one single PBIX file at the same time, right? So one single file has a lot of challenges, right? I just highlighted some of those challenges here. Like one of them is you cannot have multiple developers working at the same time on one file. Your file gradually grows. It becomes bigger and bigger because after 2 weeks you realize that, okay, I also need that table, let's bring that here. I also need this table, let's bring it here. More tables, more relationships, more data rows. Of course, your refresh time will be longer and longer. You will have more pages for your visualization. I have clients with more than 200 pages of visualizations. 200 pages of visualization. Seriously, right? So if you keep everything in one file, it is possible, right? We don't have, as far as I know, we don't have a limitation on how many pages of visualization you can have, but it makes your Power BI development speed very slow, right? Every time you open the file, it takes a really long time to go to a specific page. It takes you a really long time to go and find even a specific DAX measure to edit it, to change it, right? It has a lot of challenges. These are only a few of those challenges, right? Especially in multiple developer environment, because you want to have multiple people working at the same, let's say, reporting solution at the same time, right? So single file is not appropriate for that solution. Let's talk about one of those scenarios. Let's say, for example, when I'm going to use one Power Query table in multiple files, right? When I say using a query in multiple tables, I mean a Power Query query. Those of you who haven't worked with Power Query tables, we call it Power Query query, right? In fact, it is a table. Have you ever had this scenario that you need one table in multiple files, right? Yeah. What is the example of that table, for example?
I have no example.
Right. Sales, you might use it in multiple scenarios. Most of the time, your dimensions, right? Like date. Date table is something that you use, and probably that is one of the things that you use often, right? Date table, time table. These are tables that you usually use in like 80% of the Power BI solutions. Time table, not that much, but date table, definitely something really useful. Let's say you have a scenario like this. You have two Power BI files. One is a sales PBIX file. It has everything to do with sales, the sales orders, everything, the product, customer who is going to buy that thing, the date of the sales, and things like that. We also have another Power BI file, and that Power BI file is everything to do with inventory, right? The warehouse, the dates that we are analyzing this, what is the inventory, let's say, quantity at the moment, the product, because we want to check the product inventory. There are tables that are that needs to be available in both, right? Date table, of course. Product table in this scenario as well, right? And these two are totally two different solutions, right? There is no point to combine them together in one file, right? I want to keep them separately, but there are tables I want to share. So how do you handle such a scenario right now? If you have a table built using Power Query, right? Because that's our data transformation tool in Power BI. If you have a table created in Power Query with, let's say, 10, 15, 20, 30 transformations steps, and now you want to have this table also in the other file, right? I'm not talking about when you go and create that table in SQL Server, right? That's a totally different scenario. I'm talking about doing it in Power BI using Power Query, right? So how you can handle those? The solution for those is something called data flows. Now, how many of you heard of data flows? OK, that's like 40% of the room. OK, great. Data flows, and I'm talking about Power BI data flows, not data flows in other tools like Azure Data Factory, things like that. Those are different. So we are talking about Power BI data flows. Recently, they also call it Power Platform data flows because it is available in Power Apps as well. Data flows, let's talk about it, what it is first, for those of you who are not familiar with data flow. Data flow means a Power Query script running in the cloud, independent from Power BI report. the most important part of this definition is independent. Why? Because let's put dataflow aside. Let's say I have a Power BI report, right? When I have a Power BI report, I get data in Power BI report using which component? Get data uses Power Query, right? So when I say get data in Power BI, I'm using Power Query, right? So I use Power Query, I do my data transformation, I publish my report up to the website, and then I schedule it to refresh. And that means I have my Power Query script running in the cloud, right? So dataflow is not that. That is already there. When you publish your Power BI report in the cloud, when you schedule it to refresh, you have Power Query running in cloud, right? So don't think that dataflow is Power Query running in cloud. That is part of the definition. The most important part of this definition is it is independent from the report. Because when I schedule a Power BI dataset in the cloud, where is the output of that data? Data loads where? In a Power BI report. It comes in the Power BI dataset, right? In the in-memory structure of a Power BI dataset, in the Xvelocity, let's say, Vertipack engine of Power BI, which is the in-memory storage of Power BI. It is dependent on your Power BI dataset. It loads data into that Power BI dataset. Now, what dataflow is saying? Dataflow is saying that I will run that process, but I will not store it in your in-memory structure of Power BI dataset, right? So it has to store it somewhere else, right? Where is that somewhere else? Azure Data Lake is the storage at the moment for Power BI data flows. This is the current storage. Microsoft team are working on adding other things into this as well, like Azure SQL Database and Data Warehouse and things like that. But at the moment, as CSV files in Azure Data Lake storage, right? That's how this is stored in that format. And whenever I talk about this, the first question I get is that, OK, if it is storing it in Azure Data Lake, then that means that if I don't have Azure Data Lake subscription, then I won't have this and I cannot use it. No. When you have a Power BI account, your Power BI account in the website has a space allowance, right? Who knows how much it is? How much space you have in Power BI website for your account? 10 gigabyte, right? So that 10 gigabyte means that you can use that much in Azure Data Lake storage part of your data flow as well, right? Now, if you have your own storage, Azure Data Lake storage, if you have your own subscription, that's fine. You can connect it to this data flow. It works perfectly fine. If you don't have it, still you can use it, right? Another question that usually I get is that, like data flow, is it a premium feature or it is a pro? You can use it with Power BI Pro as well. I'll show it. Everything that I show it to you, it is all available in Pro. OK, so so far we have the data lake. We have the data flow running the Power Query script, storing it in a data lake. Now, what is the point? The point is that after doing all of these, I can use Power BI to get data from that stored location. It's like creating a middle layer here, right? Separating my data transformation layer. Then Power BI get the data after transformation is done. You make your data transformation layer abstract, separate from everything else. So if I go back to the same solution, that same scenario that I had, if I'm going to copy my date table in multiple files, I can do it this way. I can have a data flow running that script that generates the date table, right, or product table, or any other tables that I want to share among multiple files. It's stored in Azure Data Lake. Then my Power BI report gets data from there, right? The person who built this Power BI report doesn't need to know how that product table is built, right? On the other hand side, another person here knows how to build that product table and went to the Power BI data flow, built that product table, provided for that person, right? We have two different people here. One person familiar with the data concept, with the tables, with how to prepare the data, let's say, or ETL developer, extract, transform, load process of the traditional BI, let's say. And we have another person building the model after that, doing visualization and things like that, right? So other important things about this implementation is that you will have better refresh time, of course, because your transformation is now separated, right? You run it on a different schedule, and you run your refresh of Power BI dataset on a different schedule, right? Your total time still would be the same, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying your total time would be faster, but your development speed would be much faster. You don't have to wait 2 hours for all of your transformation to finish, then continue your developing, right? Because that is running on a different schedule. Your data flow running in a different schedule. Here, your Power BI dataset, you just refresh it after the data is transformed, right? So let me show you how this is working, and then you'll have some better ideas about how this is going to be implemented. So first thing you need to know is that data flow is not a desktop feature. We don't have it in Power BI desktop. It is only website service only feature. So don't go to Power BI desktop searching for where to create data flow. In the website, not in my workspace, in a, let's say, organizational workspace. My workspace is not actually the place that you should build anything really important. My workspace is like my document, right? My desktop. You don't go put anything in your desktop for organizational usage, right? So you go and create a workspace. Here I have a workspace, and then in this workspace I have the option to go and create a data flow, right? Now, before I create a data flow, let me show you what I'm going to achieve. Here I have a Power BI desktop file with a model, not a really complicated model. It's a sales table. It's a famous AdventureWorks dataset example. It's a sales table here, customer table, product table. Now, I'm missing a date table, right? And let's say I'm not going to use the default date table in Power BI for some reason. I want to use my own date table, the date table that I have created. Now, I have two options. Either go and copy it from another file that has the date table. So here I have another file which has the date table, so I'm going to open that. So I have the option to go and copy it from there, paste it here in this file. Problem solved. But is that problem solved that way? What would be the problems of having it in multiple files that way? Exactly. If I change it later on, if I copy it, bring it here, that's easy, right? But then when I change it in one of these, I have to go and change it in another one, right? And this is at the moment 2. What if I have the third file? What if I have the fourth file, right? It's not a good idea to spread your source code like in multiple places, right? You should have one version of your source code somewhere, right? And that is what data flow is going to help. So this is my other Power BI model, right? Which I have only one table in it, in this case, which is my date table. And in Power BI, there are different ways to create date table. I have written some articles about that. This date table is created by using Power Query, right? So I'll go to Edit Queries. For those of you not familiar with Power Query, this is where the transformation experience of Power BI is. So I see my date table over here. Then I can go to Advanced Editor. This will show me the entire script, M script, Power Query script of this table, right? If you are more interested to learn about Power Query, I have another session, I think 11:15, something today. So you can come to that session. But by the way, this script, M script, is the script behind the scene for every Power Query table. If I copy this script, send it to you, you open a Power BI file, create a new query, paste it there. As long as you have access to the same data source, you would see exactly the same output, right? So now I can copy this, but instead of going to this file, to this file, the place that I'm going to add it, instead of coming here and pasting it here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a data flow using this, right? I would store it as a table in Azure Data Lake. Then I use that in this file, right? And I would be able to use it in any other files later on that I'm going to use this table in it, right? That way, I will have my source code only in one place, in Dataflow. So let's do that. I'll go back to Power BI website and then create dataflow. In dataflow, tables are called entities, right? So I'll add new entity. Here you will see an experience very similar to Power Query in Power BI Desktop. We have all those data sources that I can go and select, like text file, CSV file, Excel file, SQL Server database, all different sources that you want, right? I can go and select those. And then configure the, let's say, connection, things like that. For example, if I use SQL Server database, it asks me for the server database. If these are on-premises connection, if these are local domain connection, I choose the gateway, username, password, everything like that, right? In this case, my date table is not actually coming from anywhere. It's like automatically generated using that script. So what I'll do is I'll go to here, and I'll select a blank query, right? A blank query is, of course, a blank query. It doesn't return anything. It's just a blank. So what I'm going to do is to delete this and paste that script over here, right? You see that this script doesn't really have a source. It's just start generating date table from 2010 for 20 years, 1 day at a time, things like that, right? This script is in my blog. You can go and download it if you like. Right? I won't need any on-premises gateway for this because it is not sourced from anywhere. It's just like an automatically generated script. And I click on next. Now this will bring me into the, let's say, query editor experience in the website, in the service, which is like this. So it shows me what the table looks like. Here it is. All the columns. It shows me all steps that I have for my Power Query, and these are exactly the same steps that I had in the Power Query in Power BI Desktop, right? You see that these are all steps exactly from there, right? So it is all copied there. So I don't really need this date file anymore. I can go and remove this, delete that, close it. And here you can see that at the top I also have options to do any other things I want, the transformations in Power Query, right? So I can do whatever transformations I want. In this case, I don't want to do any other transformations. I'm going to call this table date table, right? One data flow, you can consider it as a database. It can have multiple tables, right? So it can have date table, it can have time table, it can have like product table, things like that. In this case, I'm keeping it with one table only, and then save and close. All of these functions so far is something you can do with Pro. By the way, you cannot use dataflow with Power BI free account, because you cannot create it in my workspace, right? You should have it under organizational workspace. With Power BI free account, you cannot have organizational workspace, right? So it is available in Pro and Premium. With Premium, you get some extra features, but with Pro, these things that you have seen is already available in Pro. So I'm going to call it pass summit dataflow sample and save. Now, when I save the data flow, it's like the metadata, all of those, let's say, steps, transformation scripts saved. The data is not yet transformed. The data is not yet loaded. So I can go and close this window. These are all other data flows that I've created here. Now, what did I call this one? Pass summit. Yep, here it is. So this is my data flow. I can go and schedule it to refresh like a normal data set, normal Power BI data set. I can say refresh it like midnight or whatever. You can refresh it with Power BI Pro up to 8 times a day. So I just refresh it manually for now, right? Click on refresh. It takes a little bit of time to refresh. Now, while that is refreshing, I go back to this model. This is the model that I want to have that date table to come into that model, right? So I'm going to bring it over there. Yes?
Question when you're using the data flows.
Yes.
When you're pulling from another service, whether it's SQL or SSAS, there's an option there for the incremental as well. In your experience, does that take longer than the full reload of the table? That's kind of what we've been seeing. I was just wondering what your experience has been with that.
So you are saying that you used the incremental load, but it took longer than your full load, even.
Yeah.
The first time or any time after that as well?
Anytime after that.
OK, that's a little bit strange. So the question was that this gentleman is using the incremental load or incremental refresh feature that we have in dataflow. I haven't talked about that, but here it is. So you can go to that dataflow. And one of the things you can control is like incremental refresh, this option. Shouldn't be like that. I guess that there is probably something configured, maybe not exactly the way it should be. Incremental refresh, the way it works is exactly, I mean, probably you know how the incremental refresh works, right? It loads part of data that doesn't change anymore and only loads the part of data that should change, right? So usually the first time it should take a long time, but after that shouldn't. So I guess there is something that needs to be configured differently because we implemented it for different clients and they never had a problem with that. Right. OK, so let's go back here. So this data set or data flow, let's say. So this data flow, you can see that it is refreshed now. Right. I can go to this Power BI model, which I'm going to add that table in it. And I say get data, but instead of doing blank query, instead of getting data from the source, whatever it is, this time I say get data from Power BI data flows. Right? It's like another data source, right? It's like you put it in an intermediate data source. You can call it like a database, right? You put it in a database. Now you are getting data from that database. Yes?
Are data flows available in EBI or
In the paginated reports?
in the local report server?
Oh, you mean the report server that the Power BI report server? Good question. I haven't checked that. It's not? OK. People who work say it's not. But if it is not, definitely it is coming because Power BI Dataflow has a lot of changes coming soon.
So would you still have to have multiple date table or date queries to represent each of your date differences?
The role-playing scenarios, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, of course. So the question is that do we
So you would maybe you could, in essence, put a database for your different date data flows.
Yes.
In a single location.
Yeah. You mean more than one date table?
More than one date table.
But why do we need more than one date table?
Well, that's the question. That's what I'm asking.
So,
Because
yep.
I have 5 different dates in one table.
Yeah, like order date, ship dates, things like that. OK, good question. So let me talk about this. How many of you heard of role-playing dimension, by the way? OK, not that many. OK, let me explain it. Let's say in a reporting scenario, I have different types of date tables, right? I have sales date, sales order date. I have ship date, because this is going to be shipped later on, due date. Stores open date, closure date, all other types of dates that you might have, right? And usually you have like a combination of these, right? They are all dates. But in Power BI, we have the limitation that you cannot create multiple relationships between 2 tables. The second, the third, all of those would be inactive relationships, right? I'm not going to talk about that much about the relationships because that's like outside of this subject area. But they are all date tables. So for those scenarios, you still need one date table in your data flow, right? Because they are all coming from one date table. But you can import that date table multiple times, right? So the way that it works is that I go and say get data from data flows. I choose that date table, and I call it order date. Then I go through that process again. I select that date table. I call it ship date. I call it due date. I still need to have like duplicates of that here, right? Because that's giving me the ability to create relationships, multiple relationships. But I won't need to have multiple date tables under that database table. There is another approach to not to create copies. Use the user relationship function in DAX, but we won't do that for date table because date table is such a small table usually. We do that for big tables, for like tables that has like 10 million rows, 5 million rows. We would do that approach for that. So let's go back to this example. So you see that I said get data from Power BI data flows. It usually asks for your user account and things like that as well. And This was under this workspace. So these are all workspaces that I have a data flow under that. And under this workspace, you see I have multiple data flows. This one that I've created today is here. I select the date table. The preview will be coming shortly, and it shows me exactly how the date table looks like. As a person who built this data model, I have no idea how this date table is built. And I don't really need to have any idea about how this date table is built, because that's like a totally abstract subject. The person who knows best about that built it already. I'm going to use it, right? So then I go and say, just load, right? My date table here won't have 10 steps of transformation. It would be just 1 or 2 steps getting data from that data flow. I'll show you in a second when it brings it here, right? And I can use it in any other files that I want to as well. So this is the date table, and I can create a relationship. Let's leave that for now. Going to edit queries, just showing you that these is abstracted from me. So here you can see that I have only 2 steps. One step is getting data from that data flows, navigating to that data flow and getting data from there, right? So totally abstracted from me and reusable table across multiple files. If I have another file, inventory Power BI file that I want to use this date table, I can go and use it, right? And it is not just about date table. It is about any tables. Usually your dimension tables are best for these kind of scenarios that you use in multiple files, right? Very simple to implement, very useful. You might ask at this stage, I can do that also with let's say a SQL Server table. I can run T-SQL statement, store it as a SQL Server table and use it. Yep, absolutely you can use it, right? But we are talking about a team of business analysts who might not have any idea what the T-SQL is, how to write T-SQL code. For them, they can use basically Power Query and they would achieve the same thing, right? Having a database in the middle and separating their transformation layer, right?
Reza,
Yes, of course.
I was thinking about security, so that the security for the is driven right by the workspace. When you show the list of the workspaces, so how to limit access to the data flow?
So similar to the way that you control the access to the workspace. So if I create a workspace, right, and if I want you to use the table in the data flow that I created here, I should give you access to that workspace. Either view access, edit access. You should have an access to this anyway, right? As long as you have the access, then you would be able to use it.
So this is driven by the workspace access?
Yes, workspace access, not the app access.
No,
workspace. Yes, yeah, exactly, workspace. Yeah.
Okay. As long as you have access to the workspace, you can.
Then you can see it. Yes, exactly.
And you can share data flows across workspaces.
I can go and let's say if the workspace is if data flow is in workspace 1, in workspace 2 I can go and use it. Yes, of course. Yeah. Okay, so let me continue on this. We'll get to questions again more. I want to make sure that we cover everything. So what I'm saying at this stage is that data flow can actually help you to build your data warehouse, right, in Azure Data Lake. But very simple. You don't need to, let's say, spend a lot of time writing T-SQL statement, things like that. If that is your favorite spot, I mean, if you are good at writing T-SQL, if you are good at doing SSIS, things like that, you can continue that way, right? This is just like another way of doing it, more Power BI version of doing this approach, right? Separating my data transformation layer. But this is not the entire solution, right? Because still we have another challenge, right? And another challenge is when I need multiple, when I need to create something in multiple data sets, right? Not data flow, not a report, data set. Now, data set is a concept that is a little bit abstract from a lot of Power BI users. So I'm going to explain what the data set is. When you create a Power BI file, right? You go to Power BI desktop, you create a Power BI report, right? When you save that Power BI file, the file saved is a PBIX file, right? One file, PBIX file. So our thinking usually is that, OK, this is all one object. Power BI report, Power BI file, whatever you might call it, right? Behind the scene, however, it is two objects. It's not one object, it's two objects. It's a data set and a report. Report is visualizations. All the charts, visualizations, everything that you see in your visualization area, that is the report. Dataset, on the other hand side, is the place that you have your data tables, the relationships, the actual data rows, right? Connection to the data source, the refresh, things like that. Those are all in another object. We call it a dataset. When you have Power BI Desktop open, you can actually go and see it. Open Task Manager, when you have Power BI Desktop open Task Manager, you can see under Power BI Desktop thread, you'll see a task running called SQL Server Analysis Services task, right? That is dataset. Power BI dataset is SQL Server Analysis Services tabular dataset. It's the same in-memory engine that we have in Analysis Services. Even if you install Power BI Desktop on a machine that doesn't have SQL Server installed on it, still you would get it, because Power BI Desktop installed that SQL Server Analysis Services tabular engine, right? That is the dataset, right? So we have the dataset, we have the report, right? This separation is much more visible in the service. How many of you published your reports to the Power BI website? Okay, so in Power BI website, you have seen these two tabs, right? We have a tab for report, we have a tab for dataset. And you might wonder why there are two tabs. Because actually they are two different objects, right? We don't see those as two different objects in the desktop. We see it all as one file, PBIX file. But when it goes up there, it's like two separate objects, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying a dataset, right? The dataset is the place that you write your calculations, DAX calculations, right? This year versus last year sales, running total values, rolling 12-month average, all of those calculations, you write it usually in your dataset, right? Now that you know what the dataset is, have you had a scenario like this, that you want one calculation to be used in multiple datasets? I'm not talking about query. That was Power Query stuff. That was all things that you can do with dataflow. I'm talking about DAX calculation. Let's say you spend a lot of time, you write a really long DAX calculation. This DAX calculation is calculating the rolling 12 months sales for you, right? Now you want to do something like this also in your other Power BI dataset, right? We cannot do that with dataflow, because dataflow is all about Power Query scripts, right? DAX is not Power Query. It's like totally different things, right? So how we can do that? We can do that with shared dataset. Now, shared dataset is not a new concept. Shared dataset is like been there from the very first time that Power BI was introduced. Shared dataset was there. What is shared dataset? Shared dataset is saying that you can have one dataset serving multiple reports, right? It is possible. It was possible even 4 years ago when Power BI came first. The way that it works, in the Power BI service, when you click on a data set, you see these little icons beside your data set. When you click on it, you can create a new report from the same data set in the service, right? You are not going to create a new data set. From the same data set, you are creating another report, right? And you can do that in the Power BI desktop. In the Power BI desktop, you can say get data from Power BI dataset, right? So that means that this report will not have its own dataset. It will be connected to an existing dataset. By default, every report is bound to one dataset, right? 1-to-1. But you can have one dataset, 10 reports. That's absolutely fine. And that's the way that you should be doing it if you are going to use that calculation in multiple files. So you are not actually going to create multiple data sets. You are going to keep one data set shared across multiple visualization, right? So let me show you that. Now let's say, let me close this one. Let's go to another workspace here that I have some other samples. So here I have a report from movies information, right? It has some information from movies fetched from IMDb website and sales information, things like that. It shows like what is the, let's say, best rated movies of all times and things like that, comparison of sales of movies and their ratings. So these are bestseller movies, these are best rated movies, all of this information, right? I have this is already built, right? Now I'm going to do some more visualizations on this, right? But these visualizations that I want to do are going to be for a different type of user, right? I don't want those visualizations to be shared with those people who have access to this report, right? So I'm going to create another file and probably put it in another workspace because I want to share it with a different audience, right? But is there a point to copy this data set and do it over there? No, because then I have to schedule both data sets to be refreshed. After a while, if I go and change this data set, something in this data set, a calculation, something like that, I have to go and change it over there, right? We get to the same problem of copying or source code in multiple files. We don't want to do that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm keeping this data set here, and the data set is already here. I can go to the Dataset tab, and I see that there is a movies data set, right? So the data set is here. But I'm going to create another report from this data set, right? How can I create another report from this data set? So this is a button that you can use easily. And probably some of you already used this option. If I click on this, this gives me the visual editor in the website, which I can go and build visualizations, whatever I like, and then save this report in that workspace, right? Or alternatively, I can go and open a new Power BI desktop. I can do that from the desktop as well. So from the desktop, from the website. Not that much different because I'm doing only the visualization, right? So from the desktop, I can do the same. I can say get data from Power BI dataset, not from dataflow, Power BI dataset, right? And then same scenario of access to the workspaces, right? So those workspaces that I have access to, I go and see that these are data sets available there. So you can see that this is the movies data set. I can go and click that. And when I select it, it creates a report with live connection to that data set. This report will be just visualization element. It won't have any data modeling part in it. You can see it right now. It says that this is live connected to the Power BI dataset, right? I see my tables here. Similar to live connection to SQL Server Analysis Services. How many of you used this feature? Live connection to analysis services, right? So this is exactly the same, right? So I have those tables. I can bring these and do a visualization. Like this is the worldwide sales. Let's say I want worldwide sales by studio. And I can make it a really important chart, which I know all of you like. And I can build whatever visualization I want, right? Then I can save it. Multiple tabs, multiple pages, whatever you want. Save it, let's say. I save it in my desktop as movies pass sample. And then publish it. And I can even publish it to another workspace, right? That's the whole point. It's not something that you are limited to publish it in the same workspace. Now, this part is a little bit new, right? We had the concept of data sets. We had the concept of shared data set, but until like about 7-8 months ago, you could only use a data set within the workspace that your report is. And that wouldn't give you that much flexibility because what is the point if you are going to put it in the same workspace, right? Usually you want it to be on a different workspace because you want to have a different audience for that, right? Different sharing, let's say, scenario for that. Now you can do that. I can actually publish it to another workspace. Let's say I publish it to where? To here, for example, right? So this is a workspace that doesn't have that data set, right? So I click on here and publish it there. So what happens now? That data set exists in this workspace, right? Let me show you. We are in this workspace. Right? This is the place that the data set lives. right? This movies data set. Now, I published the report not in this data set. I published it into another data set, into this one. And you can see that the report is published here, right? Now, what is the data set for this report? When I go to the data set, you can see that there is a data set, right? So it looks like that the data set is copied. It is not copied. You see the icon of data set here is different from the icon of data set over there. Let me show you one more time. This is the icon of a data set, which we call it linked data set. This is not actually a data set. This is a link to actual data set. Now let me show you the actual data set. You'll see the difference in the icon. So the actual data set is here. You see the difference, right? Here in this data set, I have options like refresh it, right? Schedule it to refresh, change the connection for the gateway, all those configurations, because this is an actual data set. In the other one, because it is a link, I don't have those options. I can just create a new report. I can just see what are related objects to this, right? So that means that if I go and schedule my original data set to refresh, let's say 8 a.m. every morning, this is also getting refreshed because it is not a copy, it is a link, right? Whenever I change that, this is also changing, right? Whenever I, let's say, add a table on that, this is also changing, right? It makes your development process much more simpler because now we separated the modeling layer from the visualization layer. Yes?
Would you say that this is equivalent or similar to building AS models?
Exactly. So this is exactly similar to building an analysis services model. So if I'm, let's say, more kind of an analysis services data modeler, I can do the same with analysis services. I can go to SQL Server Analysis Services. I can build a model there. Then I can have multiple reports connected to that model, right? Or I can do it this way, because this is also analysis services, right? Power BI dataset and analysis services, same.
But on the topic of storage limits and model sizes and stuff, when you have a full license, you said 10 gigabyte limit.
Yes.
How does that sort of
How that works here. OK. So the question is that the question is more like the difference between, let's say, Power BI datasets and analysis services tabular, let's say, datasets. When I have analysis services tabular, right, I can build as large as the data model I want, right? 50 gigabytes data model, as long as I have that much memory, of course, right? I can do that on analysis services on-prem, because I have the server for that, or I have so much money I can go and spend it on Azure Analysis Services and build it over there, right? I'm not limited to a specific, let's say, capacity, right? With Power BI Pro, you have the limitation of capacity, right? 10 gigabyte. But with Premium, we have like 100 terabytes, right? But that's only the space that you have there. What is the limitation of a file? With Power BI Pro, one Power BI dataset cannot be more than 1 gigabyte, right? Even though you have 10 gigabyte space, it is still 1 gigabyte, right, with Pro. Your PBIX file cannot be more than 1 gigabyte. Now you might say, OK, oh, that's not a solution for me because my dataset is like 10 gigabyte, 15 gigabyte data. When it comes to Power BI, like analysis services, it will be compressed, right? It will be compressed significantly, depends on like how is the cardinality of your data, right? After all of those compression, if the PBIX file is growing more than 1 gigabyte, then Pro keeping everything in dataset won't be an option. However, if I have Premium, that value was like until Monday, that value was 10 gigabyte. Now it is 400 gigabyte. So if you have Premium, again, if you have enough money to spend, then you don't really have that limitation as well. But again, that depends on how much you are spending on your Premium capacity, because bigger capacity, larger, let's say, dataset. OK? So let me go back to this point. So what I'm saying here.
Just one quick question.
Yep.
From the source data set that's being shared, is it possible to discover the dependencies on that where others are sharing it or linking to it?
Yes, you mean, so from this data, sorry, from the source one. Let me go to the, you mean from this data set, so the question is that from this data set, can I go and see, is anyone using it? Yes, you can see that. So it doesn't show you here, that's one of, let's say, the challenges. It doesn't show you that visible here. So the way that you can see it here is this. I can go and see there is a report called this, right? When I hover on it, there's a report called this, right? In another workspace, you see that? Right? It doesn't show me another data set because that data set is basically just a link, right? But it shows me that there is a report in another workspace using this, right?
So that can only be done interactively by hovering and getting a tooltip?
By clicking on this button. This is show related button. So whenever you click on that on a data set or on any other object, it will show you all other related objects to that in the Power.
But you can only do that interactively right now. You can't do that programmatically or surface that.
You can do that programmatically as well. All the Power BI REST APIs and PowerShell APIs, they all give you these related objects as well. Yeah.
What about security on that? So like within analytic services that you can actually limit it by an Active Directory for a user or specific attribute. If you create the data set, how will you share it? Someone goes to write a report, how do you leverage security now?
So security in Power BI space, we can separate it in two separate areas. One is about sharing. Let's say I've created this data set. I want you to have access to it and build a report on it, right? Let's say I want this half of the room to build a report, the other half don't build, right? So I put it in a workspace. I share it with this part of the room, but not with that part of the room, right? So that means you can go and use it. And I can give you edit access, or I can give you view access on the workspace. Because you are read-only accessing that, so that doesn't really matter if you have view access or edit access, right? That's part of it. Another part of it is the security that we put on the data. Similar to analysis services, I can go and say, I give access to this half of the room for this report, but in this half of the room, I only want the first row, people sitting in the first row, to have access to the entire data. The second row to have access only to the data of, let's say, California state, another area, things like that. I define different roles, different, let's say, row-level security configuration under that data set, exactly similar to the way that you do it in analysis services. All of those are possible. The only thing is that in analysis services, you do it all using the Active Directory configuration. Here, you do it using your workspace and your Power BI accounts. Okay. Yep.
And there's one other too that we actually use. So we don't give our users access necessarily to the workspace, but we give them directly access to the data set so that we can share. And so it'll show up when you do like create report, it'll show up in your list still as your promoted data set, but they don't have access to see the workspace per se. And so by going to the data set,
You share the actual data set directly.
data
Yes.
set itself, and then you can add on specific permissions on whether or not they can reshare or build upon that.
Yes.
Get to the base data.
Yes, that is possible to share individual objects. However, there would be some challenges doing it because then monitoring where all of these configuration has been done, especially if you have too many objects in one workspace, might make it a little bit challenging. It is a possible option, but it might be a little bit high cost for maintenance later on. Yeah. Okay, we'll do one more question and then I'll continue. Yes.
Yeah, following up on that, won't you lose those configurations when you publish it to the app?
Can you please repeat?
Won't you lose those configurations when you publish it to the app?
When I publish this, would I lose the configuration that I said, for example, this report, this object, these people have access to that? No, they would be still there. Yeah.
Because all the data sets which are available in the app are available to all users with access. Yes.
Yes, so the access in the Power BI, we can call it this way. That is more like union of all accesses that you have, right? So let's say I create a workspace with 10 data sets, right? And I give you access only to one of those data sets, right? Then I create an app on top of the entire workspace and share it with everyone in this room, right? That means everyone have access to every workspace, even the workspace that you have access to, right? So it's like an inclusive access. It's not saying that because I shared that one exclusive with you, that means no one else will have access to that, right? It's the way that configuration works in Power BI. OK, I'll continue. We'll get to questions again more. So this concept of like having shared data set is definitely a great thing, right? You don't need to replicate your code. But there is an important thing about it. And that is when I go and build a Power BI report from an existing data set. Let me show you that experience again. When I go to Power BI desktop, when I say get data from Power BI dataset here, as a report visualizer, as a data, let's say, analyst, as a business analyst, whatever you might call these people who are building the report, I will see tons of data sets, right? All data sets that I have access to. These data sets might be data sets that I have created. These might be data sets that someone else created and shared it with me somehow. How I'm going to know that which of these data sets are good to use, right? How I'm going to know that these data sets has been tested and are ready for me to use, right? There is a labeling system for that. You see this endorsement column? There's a labeling system for that, which is quite useful. This is also added quite recently, not that much recent, let's say the past 4 or 5 months ago. You can consider this as the concept of gold, silver, bronze report, right? Here, we don't call it that way. We call it certified, promoted, and nothing, right? So default is that these are like nothing, right? These are nothing about security. This is just like a labeling system, right? When I build a data set, let's say myself, I'm a data modeler. I go and build my data set. I go and do a few testings. I make sure that all of these calculations works, everything works right. Then I can go and promote this data set. And the way that you do it is from the website, right? Like, for example, here. Under the data set, I can go to the setting of that data set. This is a place that you do all gateway configuration, things like that. There's an endorsement part here as well. Everything by default is default, right? I can set it as promoted. Then it will show the promoted badge. You can consider this like your silver data set. Now, certified by default is disabled for many people. The admin, the Power BI tenant admin, can go and say, I only authorize this group of people to go and certify reports because they have a process. They know they should go through these processes, checkboxes, and when they completed all of those, then they know that this is a good data set. They go and certify that data set. And usually the way it works here is that certified data sets come first. You see it here. Then promoted data sets, and then all those nothing else data set, right? It's a labeling system. Yeah.
What happens if you fill in the description?
I think it will come like when you hover on these, like a tooltip. It will come like a tooltip for that if you fill out the description. I never filled it, so this is my guess, I'd say. OK, so let's go back to the architecture. So I built all of these to get to this point. So the architecture that I'm proposing for a multi-developer scenario is this. We have the 3 layers of building a business intelligence reporting system. I've separated my data transformation layer using dataflow. I can do all transformations I want using dataflow. I have, let's say, a very good developer who is good at writing M-script, who is good at doing Power Query transformations. I dedicate that person to go and build dataflow. And it can be more than one person, of course, because multiple people can work on multiple, let's say, data flows or dataflow objects at the same time. Then I have a layer in the middle, which is my data modeling layer. You can call it shared data set. You can call it shared data model. There are different names for that. You can call it data marts, right? This is the place that I have my shared data sets, right? And for building my shared data set, I get data from multiple places. Part of that comes from Power BI data flows as well. I build it, I publish it, and then I can have my visualization layer. Usually in every organization, you have more people good at building visualization than people good at building DAX calculations. And Power Query, they built the visualization on top of these reports, right? That is the 3 layers of the architecture that helps you to have developers working on each side of these at the same time. And it is not just about, let's say, Power BI visualization. This is how we are going to build it, right? In the first layer, I'm going to get data from anywhere I like, from SQL Server, from Excel, from email, from anywhere I like. I'm going to build my data flows. For the second layer, which is my modeling layer, I'm getting data usually from my data flows, because that is like a first layer build. I'm getting data from my data layers. For the third layer, which is my visualization, I'm getting data from a Power BI dataset. This is how the implementation part of it works, right? Is it just for Power BI? No. You can use it in other places. Like, how many of you used Power BI report and your users came to say to you that I want this visualization, this data to be exported in Excel, right? Pretty much everyone, right? People like to have things in Excel. Now, a lot of them go and click on a visualization and say export to Excel, right? Which is OK. It has limitations. You have a limitation of number of rows you can export. It would be offline. When I export it, this is offline. This is not talking with that Power BI dataset anymore, right? However, if I use this option, now, how many of you use this option? Analyze in Excel. OK, good. I'm glad some of you are using it. So analyze in Excel. I can have a Power BI dataset. On the Power BI dataset, I can say, analyze this dataset in Excel. It will create an Excel connection live to Power BI dataset. And I can do whatever I want in Excel. Pivot table, pivot chart, all of those things that your Excel users are good at, right? The good thing about this method is that I don't have the limitation of the number of rows. I can do whatever I want. And another good thing is that it is always live connection, right? Whenever I refresh the data, I get the new data coming in. Again, another good thing about this is that when I do that export data in Excel, right? When I export it in Excel, it's an Excel file. And it includes sensitive data, right? Confidential data. Then I share it with you. You don't have access to the Power BI report, but because I shared this Excel with you, you have access to the data, right? If I use this option, when I share the Excel file with you, you need to have access to that Power BI dataset. Otherwise, you won't be able to see it. If I have row-level security configuration in my dataset, you would only see part of data that you have access to that, right? So it makes the whole process much more, let's say, usable, right? So back to the same architecture layers that we have, my visualization layer can be Excel, right? It can be Power BI, it can be Excel, because I have the concept of shared data set, so I'm using it anywhere, right? What about other visualization tools? How many of you are using Tableau? Yeah? Don't be shy. OK. How many of you are using Tableau? How many of you are using ClickSense, things like that? No one ClickSense? OK. One. OK. So those visualization tools, you might use it because your company decided to choose that as a visualization tool. There was some decisions about getting that. But still, you can use Power BI as your data modeling tool, right? Because Tableau doesn't really have a modeling engine. It is a great tool for visualization, but it doesn't have a modeling engine. Now, because I have the data set, this data set is like analysis services data set, I can connect it to any visualization tools. There is a, not a concept, but there is a thing called in Power BI called, or in analysis services called XMLA endpoint. XMLA endpoint is a URL, like a server name, you can call it. A server name, a server URL, that you can use to connect to that Power BI dataset. You can open SQL Server Management Studio, connect to the Power BI dataset up in the cloud. You can open SQL Server Data Tools, connect to there. You can open Tableau, connect to Power BI dataset. You can open ClickSense, connect to Power BI dataset. You can open any tools that works with analysis services, connect to the Power BI dataset up there, right? This is XMLA endpoint, right? Now, there are like some details about XMLA endpoint, read, write, read, things like that. But the XMLA endpoint read is available at the moment. Unfortunately, it is premium only, right? There are some discussions it might be available for Pro, right? I'm going to show you how this works. So if I have that scenario, then I can use Tableau as my visualization tool, and I still have my data flow. I still have my Power BI dataset, right? What about paginated reports? Any of you been in paginated report session yesterday, the day before? OK, great. Paginated reports is fine printed design, let's say, reports you can build using actually combination of reporting services with Power BI, right? You can go and build those. You can say, I want my report to be built for A3 page with this much margin on each side. I want this to be paginated. I want the header in every page to be like that, the footer in the last page to be like that. You can design it really perfectly well, right? If you are familiar with reporting services, you know how it works, right? Now, that report, that paginated report, can be built on top of exactly the same scenario, right? So I have the visualization layer separately, and that makes everything simpler. In this visualization layer, I can have paginated reports, I can have Tableau, I can have Power BI reports, I can have Excel, I can have anything connecting to the shared data set, right? But if it was not built like this, if it was all in one Power BI file, I couldn't do this, right? Now that I separated these layers, I have the flexibility to work with everything I want in one, let's say, environment in building one Power BI solution, right? OK, benefits of this architecture, lots of benefits. I explained some of these through this session already. Like, for example, you have a decoupled transformation modeling visualization layer. The decoupling these makes it easier that you can have multiple developers working at the same time on this scenario. It makes your solution, let's say, platform independent. You can have another tool, plug it into Power BI, right? If you feel that that is a tool that you need to use for some reason, right? It gives you a lot of usages, right? Now, we have like about 7-8 minutes. What about enterprise Power BI team? In enterprise Power BI team, we are talking about developers, right? And developers, when I talk about developers, I mean people who are good at writing code, people who know T-SQL, people who know SSIS, people who know, let's say, analysis services, right? For that environment, you need governance. You need a good strategy for governance. You have also self-service users. So you need to consider all of those, how you are going to build that. It is going to be the same 3 layers that I showed you, but those 3 layers are going to be built a little bit differently, right? When we are talking about developers, developers are good with SSIS, let's say, Informatica, Azure Data Factory, T-SQL, right? So they can use that approach and feed the data, build the data warehouse in Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Synapse, all those kind of new things, right? Then you can have a SQL Server Analysis Services model on top of that, which would be your modeling layer, right? And tabular, of course, because multidimensional is not dead, but it's not alive as well. And then Power BI connection to that, right? So it's, again, the same 3 layers that you have, but you build it differently. Which one is better? I always answer it this way, that which one you are more comfortable with. If you are more comfortable with Power Query, go and do your transformation with Power Query. If you are more comfortable writing T-SQL code, go ahead and use that, right? You choose the tool that you are working with that. But having the architecture is important. Having those layers separately is important.
So what if you don't yet have an analysis services tabular model at enterprise scope?
In that case, I'd say go and start with Power BI dataset. Because if you don't have already an analysis services, let's say, environment to go and build it, Power BI dataset, especially the Power BI premium datasets, are going to be, let's say, the most premium experience you are going to get across analysis services and Power BI, right? Probably in about a year or two, Power BI dataset would have much more features than the analysis services, right? OK, so I'll just show you one last thing in the last 5 minutes that we have, which is a tool for every architecture. Usually, you need to have a really good tool to work with. There are good tools that you can use in Power BI. DAX Studio, I highly recommend you to use it. Vertipack Analyzer, these two built by SQL BI, I highly recommend using it. There's a tool that we built as well, which is free. You can go and download it from our website called Power BI Helper. It gives you some information about your data model. It documents out your entire script, Power Query script, M script, your DAX expression. Sometimes you have a DAX measure. This measure is pointing to another measure. That measure is pointing to another measure, to another measure. And it is really hard to navigate where you should go and fix it. It gives you the measure hierarchy. It gives you a lot of other things, right? Now, just to show you a very quick example of this. This is the Power BI Helper, as I said, free. You can go and download it from our website. Now I'm going to connect to one of the models that I have. So that XML endpoint that I showed you, this is how I can go and see actually the URL for my dataset in the cloud, right? So I can copy that. Now I can come and paste it here. Paste it here, right? I'm connecting to the model. OK, I need to log in. Yeah. And it shows me all data sets that I have in the Power BI workspace. So you see these data sets? These are exactly those data sets that I have over here, right? All of these data sets. Then I can go. Yes, yeah. Then I can go and select any of these data sets. Let's say I select this one. It shows me all tables and the hidden tables. Power BI creates some hidden tables that you might not see in Power BI Desktop, but it shows you those tables. It shows you all the expressions that you have, your DAX expressions, things like that. It shows you the measure dependency tree for that, right? So all of these are available. You can even export it to a document if you like. And then use this document somewhere, right? So this is the document showing all my measures now in one place, right? So in every, let's say, architecture environment, you need to use tools that can make things much more simpler for you. So I highly recommend using this. This does a lot of other things as well. It will give you modeling advice, how to make performance of your model better, and things like that. But let's skip that part. Now, I had some slides which I skipped, as you can see, but these slides will be available in the website. Links to read more, these are all available up there. I explained almost everything I wanted to tell you about the development architecture, but hadn't time to talk about sharing architecture. These links include both development architecture, sharing architecture. That is the Power BI architecture book that I wrote. Some of these things that I explained are fairly new. They are not in this book, but majority of the let's say, other parts of architecture are available. The link to that tool, everything is there. Make sure to go ahead and use it. If you can't find the slides, you can just send me a message from Redicat website. I'll send you the slide later. Because we don't have that much time, I'm going to close it. If you have any questions, please come forward. Thank you.